And I will open this up to conversation at the end that won't be recorded, so we can have dialogue. If you want to share anything that maybe you want to talk about further, if you have questions for me, or you want to share anything about your experience that you maybe were moved by, or you want to share something about your own journey, I love to have dialogue about that. As I mentioned, this is my story. Obviously, each person has their own story. Also, the people in my life have their own story, so this is simply my telling of my story. If you talk to my parents, they have their own story, both my dad, both my mom, my brothers. I have two younger brothers, Ryan and Patrick, who also went through their own experience with this. All of us know that when you go through something, we're not the only person that goes through it. Everybody in our lives goes through it and has their own experience of it. So this is my recollection of it. Much of my story also is kind of in chunks, as I will talk more about how my brain injury impacts me. I don't have much memory, actually, of a whole kind of year of my life is pretty much gone. And there's kind of pieces of my life that are very blurry for me. Some things I remember kind of in chunks, and then some things I don't have much memory of at all. I kind of look at there's a period in my life that's pretty much kind of blacked out. But before I get into that, I want to share a little bit more about who I was before this all happened. I look at my life as kind of broken up into two parts, two chapters of the first part being who I was before my brain injury, and the second part is who I was after my brain injury, and life before brain injury and life after brain injury. So who I was before that, I was 14 years old when this happened, and as I mentioned, I pretty much had a normal life, as anybody can say, quote unquote normal. My parents are married, still happily married, and I have two younger brothers, as I mentioned. And I grew up in New Ulm. My family, I was born and raised, and I was able to have a great upbringing here, where I now am having my own family, which I'm blessed to have. I was kind of a typical straight A student, the type of student that did not need to study to earn an A. It kind of came naturally for me. I was very involved in school activities. I played softball. I played.
Trying to go potty?
I played. If you are on here, if you can mute yours so then we don't hear you. All right. I'm gonna try to mute some of you all. Hold on, so that you don't have background noise. Mute all. All right. There we go. So I also was involved in choir and violin and piano, and had a really great group of friends that I was very involved with. I was a typical 8th grade student, like I said, the type of student that didn't need to study to earn an A, and life was going pretty great up until December 13th, which was 20 years ago today. As I mentioned, I have no memory of that day at all. I just only know it from what I have been told. This picture actually was taken of me on the day that I got sick. This was actually the morning of the day that I went into my coma. I was picked that morning to be OK Kid. I was in 8th grade in the junior high, and every month they picked what was called the OK Kid, which stood for Outstanding Kid, and you were nominated by different teachers. And every grade had a boy and a girl who was picked from the grade. So I was the 8th grade girl that month that was picked. And they took that picture that morning for the paper, because it was always put in our community paper. And that was, ironically, the last picture that was ever taken of me before my life changed forever. So I look at that picture, and it's just kind of an eerie feeling and kind of an interesting feeling of knowing that I had no idea what was going to be happening that afternoon, and that my life would be forever changed. By probably 2 hours later, after this picture was taken, I was sick, and I eventually finally went to the nurse's office. I was the type of student that I hated missing school. I loved school. So I refused to go to the nurse, and unless I was really sick. And I had a headache that morning, and I kind of had mentioned, like a couple days before that, I kind of said, I kind of don't feel well, but I never really had anything serious. And then I guess I went to school because I didn't want to miss school, and I didn't think anything of it. And then by afternoon, I went to the nurse's office, and the school nurse thought that I just had the flu that day, because that was going around. So my mom was called, and she was told, your daughter has the flu, come get her. It's nothing to be concerned about. Take your time. My mom was going to pick me up on her lunch break. And then my mom came to school to pick me up, and she knew right away that something was not right. By that time, I was starting to kind of go into that coma state, and I was kind of in and out of it. And she knew that something was not right. She thought that maybe somebody had given me something, like I looked like I was maybe, like I had drugs and I was having a reaction or something. But she knew that something was wrong, so she took me to the clinic. And each hour I was getting progressively worse. And also at that time, the snowstorm was starting to come, because it's Minnesota. And the doctors at the New Ulm Medical Center, they were concerned that obviously it was something that maybe was serious, as I was becoming more and more incoherent, and they realized that it was hard for me to answer questions, and I wasn't really knowing what was going on. And I was going into a comatose state, and they knew that they needed to fly me out of New Ulm because it was probably going to be over their heads. And my parents had to make a decision. And they chose to fly me to Minneapolis Children's Hospital because we have family in the Twin Cities. The choices were either Rochester, Mayo here in Minnesota, or the Twin Cities, and my parents chose the Twin Cities. However, with the snowstorm coming, they had to contact an actual airplane because the helicopter could not take off. A lot of my story, I feel like there have always been people that have been placed on my path for a reason. I do believe, as I talk, you'll hear as I talk more about my story, that I believe in divine intervention. I believe in a higher power. I call it God. I believe you can call it whatever you want to call it. I believe it's all one. I refer to it as God, and I believe that God intervened in many different ways in my life. And one of the first experiences of God intervening, I believe, was that snowstorm and having somebody who was willing to fly me to the Children's Hospital. If I would have stayed in New Ulm that night, I would have most likely lost my life because a virus was attacking my brain. At that point in time, they actually had no idea what was going on. They just knew that it was over their heads and they needed to get me to Minneapolis Children's Hospital. Thankfully, I was able to get, they found a pilot that was willing to fly in the snowstorm. I would love to someday meet him. I believe he actually probably is a huge reason why I'm here. I don't know who he is. I wish I could know who he was because I owe my life to that man. And my mom came in the plane with me. My dad had to actually drive because they could only take one person in the plane. So my dad drove. He said it was a very long drive, I can imagine. He thankfully made it, thanks to God once again. And by that time, a lot of decisions needed to be made, and my parents had to make all those decisions. For anybody who's probably been in a situation where it's life or death and it's trauma, decision-making is a huge thing that I think we underestimate. There's a lot to having to make decisions when there's a crisis, and you just kind of go into crisis mode. Thankfully, we have family here in New Ulm, so they were able to take care of my brothers while my parents had to deal with decisions and my situation in the Twin Cities. And we didn't know what was happening. Obviously, you don't know what's happening when you're going through something like that. But eventually, I went into a deeper comatose state, and they called in a disease specialist at that time at Minneapolis Children's because it was a disease that was attacking my brain. And an MRI was done of my brain to see what was going on. And at that time, then my parents were talked to by the disease specialist, and they were informed that I had what's called encephalitis attacking my brain. Actually, herpes encephalitis. So for me, instead of herpes coming on the form of a cold sore like most people, mine decided to turn around and went to my brain and was attacking my brain. And they had thankfully just come out with a drug called acyclovir that then was thankfully a drug that was going to fight the virus. So it was a war between my brain, this virus in my brain, and this drug. And all they could do was wait and pray. The coma, they did not know how long it was going to take. They all said time would tell. I was in a coma for 5 days, and then I woke up from my coma on December 18th. So we can go to the next one. So that is me. That's the first time I sat up and smiled. So obviously this was Christmas, around the Christmas holiday season. And when I first came out of my coma, I was in what's called a manic state. I was very happy. I was very joyful. Some people, you can come out of a coma in many different ways. Some people come out angry. Some people come out very emotional. I came out very happy, very giddy. I also had really no short-term memory at that point in time. I would ask, where are we? And then 5 minutes later, I would ask again, where are we? And they would tell me, we're at Minneapolis Children's Hospital, you're sick, and you're getting taken care of. And they would tell me that, and then I would forget that 5 minutes later. So they did not know how that was going to impact me long-term and what the long-term effects were going to be. They then had the neurologist come in and talk more about what was happening to my brain, and explained to me that explained to my family and I that I had a traumatic brain injury, and that really time would tell. Every traumatic brain injury is different. If anybody has experience with a traumatic brain injury, the thing about a traumatic brain injury is that it's invisible and you can't see it, and I'm going to talk more about that. I'm going to talk more kind of about my journey of rehabilitation after I kind of show you more of the evolution of my journey through pictures, and then I'm going to talk more about how that's impacted me as I go into my presentation. But I think it's good for you to see more of the picture of the story before I kind of talk more in detail about how it impacts me. But anyways, so that's me. And we spent Christmas there. We celebrated it like any other Christmas when you go through something like that during the holidays. thankfully, my parents, my dad is a rehabilitation counselor. I am blessed with, I believe I was born to the right family. I believe I was born to the right parents. I also believe that was part of God's timing and God's plan, that they knew, I think God knew that I needed those parents and that I was given them for a reason. My mom also works for a company that provides services to adults with developmental disabilities. So if you could say I had probably the best parents that could offer the best support, I did. They knew that I needed to have as much rehabilitation as possible, and they always talked about what's the long-term plan, what's the picture, and they treated my situation really with the best care that they could. And we handled that holiday still with celebration. We honored me being alive. We celebrated me being alive. We didn't know what the future was going to look like, but we still celebrated it. And we brought the gifts up to the hospital room, and we opened up gifts that night, just like we do every other Christmas Eve. My grandma came up as well, and we opened up gifts like we always do. So it was a night to celebrate. I don't remember any of it. Also, a funny story, since I don't remember it. Humor is a good thing. My dad always talks about humor as being also a great part of rehabilitation, and we did use humor. It's good to have that in life. You can't be always depressed and always sad about things. So I would ask to open up a present. I wanted to open up a gift so badly because, those gifts were sitting in front of me in my hospital room, and it was very tempting, and I wanted to open up just one gift. And I would forget that my parents would tell me, no, it's not Christmas yet. We have to wait till Christmas. And I would ask 10 minutes later. So then my mom got the bright idea to let me open up one gift. And then I would forget, I should say, at first I forgot that I opened up the gift. And then my mom got the bright idea for her to rewrap the same gift over and over again. And I got just as excited every time I opened the same gift. So we laugh every Christmas. We kind of joke about that. I would open up this glass butterfly that I now have actually sitting on my desk here in my home office as my reminder of where I've come from, my whole journey, my whole 20-year evolution. So that's my reminder of that. But yeah, it's kind of a funny story. And I would get so emotional, and I would cry, and I would give my brothers a hug. And my brothers also joked, is Jennifer always going to be this nice? No, I did get back to being my normal teenager self, and we would have our challenges as teenage siblings. But at the first few days after my coma, I was very hyper emotional, as I had kind of previously mentioned, of me being very lovey-dovey instead of aggressive, where some people can actually wake from a coma being very aggressive, and I thankfully was very lovey-dovey, and I wanted to hug everybody and do all that stuff. But eventually I came back to my normal self. So that's me, and that's us. That's us celebrating the holiday together. My brother Patrick here on the right in the bottom picture, his eye, he got in a sledding accident that week, and he looked worse than I did, but I was the one in the hospital, so we joked about that as well. And that's the thing about traumatic brain injury, and I'll talk more about that, is that it's invisible. And people would come up and visit us and, say hi, and we'd have family and some close friends that would come say hi and visit us, and they would all say, oh my gosh, she looks so great, she's doing so great. But they really didn't know the reality of what was truly going on, and that I had no short-term memory, and we were looking at how is this going to impact the rest of my life, because memory is a huge part of our life. We rely on it, and we underestimate how much we use it. And just like anything else, we never really realize what we lose until we lose it, and how much we need it until it's gone. So that's our family, and that's my brother Ryan on the left, and my brother Patrick on the right, and my mom Kathy, and my dad Craig. Sorry, my voice is still a little, I'm recovering from a wonderful virus this past week. Used my thieves oil, thank God. So the year after December 13th, 1995 was really kind of the big test and challenge for me. I think everybody has, if you go through a traumatic experience, or even if you're diagnosed with something, or you have a child that gets diagnosed, dates are huge. We always we connect with dates, and we have anniversaries of things, both good and both bad. And also that whole kind of year after that big traumatic experience is a huge, huge learning curve and a huge adjustment. Our whole family had to adjust to me having a traumatic brain injury. It was a world that we were completely foreign to before this happened, and having any type of disability. It's a whole eye-opening experience. I basically went back into my life, quote unquote, my normal routine life at a slow pace. Thankfully, my dad, being a rehabilitation counselor, he knew what needed to happen for rehabilitation. He understood the rehabilitation process and the rehabilitation journey in a different way than some other people maybe can. So we pulled in a lot of professionals. My dad is a person who believes in going to professionals and going to people who also have been there before. That's also a big reason of why I believe in sharing stories, and I believe in hearing from other people, is because you hear from people who have gone through the same things or something similar. I'm still continuing to learn from people. I love hearing from other people, and I believe that obviously this is just my story. I don't have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers, but if you can hear it from somebody, it might trigger something and inspire you. And I believe that's part of the healing process also. There's healing in talking about your story. I think there's always a closure piece, but there's never full closure. I think it's an evolution, and you're always evolving. So the year after my brain injury was a lot of adjustment. We knew that it was kind of just a whole trial and error, try it and see how I was going to do, because we had no idea what we were going into. I started going back to school I started actually part-time days, because fatigue is a big part of traumatic brain injury, and it still is an impact for me. I have to get pretty much enough sleep for my brain to function. And at first, that first year after the brain injury, your brain is still actually finding new pathways, and it's a muscle, and the brain is something that needs to be worked, just like exercising. So for me, I really had to kind of do what I needed to do to just simply learn what was going to work for me. And we started out slow, going back to my school days as just part-time. And I also was put in the learning disability room. So I went from a student who was straight A, who didn't have to study to earn an A. I was in advanced math. I was with a group of friends that knew me as Jennifer before the brain injury. And when you're 14 years old, you can't expect 14-year-old girls to understand what traumatic brain injury is. And once again, it's invisible, so you can't see it. So I went back to school, not really even knowing fully what my life was going to look like. I have bits and pieces that I remember of it, but very little. It's very blurry to me. But I do remember being part of the learning disability room. And there was a teacher there, the learning disability teacher, who thankfully, she took a strong interest in my story, and she really she knew that she was going to be a huge part of my journey. And she ended up being a huge part of my journey, and she kind of took me under her wing. God bless her. As I mentioned, God placed certain people on my path, and she was one of them, my first learning disability teacher. I will call her Mrs. W. And she was just an awesome person. She took time to really understand traumatic brain injury. She knew that traumatic brain injury was different than learning disabilities. It was a whole different branch in and of itself. The school had never dealt really with anybody with a traumatic brain injury, so we had to educate them. My parents also, thankfully, were spokespeople for me. They educated the teachers, and Mrs. W also helped the teachers understand, and we just kind of took it one day at a time. I eventually went back into doing full-time school and got back into my regular classes, and I was able to take my classes and not have any major issues with the classes. The big thing that impacted me was the memory. So obviously, test taking was a big change, because test taking is all memory. So I just did what I could. I did the best I could. I was always a very good writer, so my writing was never impacted by my brain injury, and that actually ended up being a huge gift for me. I would be able to make up for some of the classes where I would get maybe a D or sometimes an F on a test because I had no memory. No matter how hard I would study, I would take the test and I couldn't remember anything. So if I failed the test, I would then make up for it with doing really well on a class project or a paper. And some of the teachers were nice enough to maybe let me do extra credit to make up for that. A big part of that piece for me was having to let go of perfection. That was a big part of my journey of going from that straight A student who didn't know what it was like to have to study and really work hard to earn an A, to suddenly having this brain injury that no matter how hard I went over something, my brain just could not retain that information. So for me, I had to kind of accept that, and that was a huge piece for me to learn and to embrace it, and to sometimes celebrate getting a C was a huge thing. I was like, oh my gosh, I got a C. I didn't get a D. I didn't get an F. That's something to celebrate. So you kind of tweak what is your understanding of accomplishments, and what becomes an accomplishment can be different. So that was really my first year after the brain injury, was adjusting to those big things. I also fought it. I fought my change. This is obviously talking about my story in a 1 hour time frame. There's a lot to the story. If you want more detail about kind of this evolution for me, I did write my memoir, which I'll share at the end, that talks more about kind of the whole evolution and my whole process of having to really embrace the change and how it really truly impacted me. But I did fight it for a long time. I wanted to not really fully accept it. And I believe you go through the grieving process. As I've mentioned, sometimes if some of you have heard some of my presentations or some of my oil classes before, I talk a lot about grief. I believe every transition and every traumatic experience brings with it having to go through the grief processes. If you're not familiar with that, the whole denial, anger, bereavement, and depression and acceptance, those 5 stages. And yes, I went through all of those. I definitely wanted to fight it at first and avoid it and not accept it. It was a big part of me having to really be okay with not being perfect and be okay with claiming it as part of my identity and not being shameful of it. I'm now a big fan of Brene Brown, as some of you know, and I'll talk about her also in the end of my presentation for a resource. She talks a lot about shame. And now from my own journey, I have a whole different appreciation of shame, and especially with the clients I work with now in my energy healing business, I think shame is a huge energy in our culture, in our lives. And I think I went through my own journey of that shame and not having to really having to go through that whole process of acceptance and being okay with it. And not being afraid to say I'm a traumatic brain injury survivor, but rather claiming that and being proud of it and not fighting that. So that was a huge thing. And part of that shame came with me not wanting to use any compensatory skills is kind of a term that we use in rehabilitation, having to utilize writing things down. For a long time, I would write things on my hand. So I would have notes up my whole arm the first few months after my brain injury, because I learned pretty quickly that I couldn't remember things. And in order for me to remember things, I had to write it down. But I did not want to carry around a planner or any form of a device that made me look like I had a brain injury, because I felt like if I carried anything with me, or if I had a calendar even in my hand, as a teenager, I looked like I had a disability, and it put a huge label on me, and it made me different. And I didn't want to be different from anybody else. So therefore, I hid it, and I would just write those notes up my hand. All my homework assignments, everything I had to remember, I put it on my hand. And then I learned that ink washes off your hands when you wash your hands. So then I couldn't remember some of my assignments, and I would forget the things, and then I would have a consequence for that. I would maybe forget an assignment or something like that, or forget to go somewhere. So finally then I convinced myself to start writing things down on Post-it notes, because I did not want to do a whole full-blown planner. And then I started writing things on a Post-it note, and I would put the Post-it note in my pocket, and I would have a piece of paper every day. Anything I would have to remember, I would put it on my piece of paper and I would put it in my pocket. But then I would forget that piece of paper was in my pocket, and it would end up going in the laundry, and my mom would wash my clothes and I would forget about it. So then I finally caved in, because then at that time back in 1996, 97, school planners started to become popular, and the school started selling them. And then I started seeing other students had planners, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. Other students have planners. I don't feel like it's titling myself as disabled. So then I finally caved in, and I got the school planner, and I started to slowly use it and realize I needed this, and I embraced it, and it wasn't something that made me disabled and didn't title me as that. And I finally really started to turn over a leaf and really kind of started to blossom at that time and embrace myself and started utilizing more organizational skills. A huge piece of my rehabilitation also was organization, because for me, I was thankfully an organized person before my brain injury. So that skill served me well after my brain injury. And that's been a huge part of me having to live an organized, balanced life, which I will also talk about as I progress into my presentation here. So now we're going to talk about, so that was kind of the first year after my brain injury. So things were kind of starting to move forward as me starting to embrace that and utilize the planner and utilize more organizational systems. And then about a year and a half later, I lifted my hand to my neck one day when I was in 9th grade, a year and a half after my brain injury, and I felt a lump on my neck, and I instinctively knew that it was cancer. I just had a gut feeling that it was cancer. Just something in my higher self told me this doesn't feel right, and I think this is bad. And I showed my mom, and at first my mom was kind of like, no, I'm sure it'll just go away. It's probably just a swollen lump, let's ignore it. We don't have to worry about it, because I think my mom, she wanted to protect me, and she wanted to believe that it's nothing. She didn't want to believe that anything would happen to me after the year I had just had with my brain injury. And it didn't go away after a couple days, and finally then my mom, she called Minneapolis Children's Hospital, who we had been to the year before, my neurologist, and she said, Jennifer has this lump. Do you have somebody who, we need to go to somebody? And they said, yes, get it checked out. So my mom took me to New Ulm Medical Center back again, and we actually saw the same doctor who saw me the night that I went into my coma, and he actually had a tear. I do remember him getting emotional, and he actually said, "Oh my gosh, I think you have cancer. You have Hodgkin's disease." And we couldn't believe that that was happening the year after my brain injury. So they think what happened is that I probably had cancer before my brain injury, and I did not know I had cancer. And instead of the cancer coming out in the form of a lump, like most people, mine turned around and actually caused the herpes to attack, and it caused the cancer to be dormant for a year. And then eventually the cancer came out again a year and a half later in the form of the lump. So I didn't even know that I had the cancer, and the herpes encephalitis then attacked my brain because my immune system was weak from the cancer. So that is what they think happened. So I went through then 6 months of chemotherapy, went back to Minneapolis Children's Hospital, which became kind of my second home. And we chose not to do radiation. I did have cancer. They did a scan. I had cancer both in my neck and also in my chest. Thankfully, I'm grateful that we chose not to radiate. Thankfully, the chemotherapy did kill the virus. And we took it kind of just as, all right, this is another journey, part of the journey. And interestingly enough, the cancer actually, I believe, was part of a blessing in my journey. It almost gave me freedom to talk about what I was going through emotionally, because it was something that people understood. Where my brain injury was something that people really didn't fully understand. It was definitely, nobody had dealt with brain injury here in my community. A lot of my friends, they were teenagers. They didn't know what traumatic brain injury or encephalitis was, understandably so. And cancer was something that everybody knew. It's a universal word. And I think for me, it was also an easier way for me to kind of explain what I was going through. And it also was a physical thing. I did lose my hair. That was my first day of chemotherapy. We didn't know what to expect at that time. I thankfully handled chemotherapy pretty decently compared to many other people. I was very, very blessed. My parents also were very open to an integrative approach to my care, which I also will go into more detail later in my presentation. But we did pretty much anything integrative we did. I did massage, I did chiropractic care, I was taking 60 vitamins a day. My mom had a friend that did Shaklee vitamins at that time, and she called my mom up and said, hey, I think we should get her on supplements. So I was taking those vitamins, and I actually barely ever got sick. I never got actually physically sick from the chemotherapy, and I barely missed school. The only time I missed school was on the days that I had chemo, which was every 2 Fridays. I would have 2 Fridays on, 2 Fridays off for 6 months. So Friday afternoons, my mom and I would go up to Minneapolis Children's, and I would get hooked up, and the chemotherapy went into my portacath that was put into my chest, which became my best friend. It then got surgically taken out of me, and I saved it for a Christmas ornament because it was my best friend for a long time. Because every time I would get poked and prodded, it would just go into my portacath instead of having to find a vein. And I always hated, my veins getting poked and your blood getting taken and all that fun stuff, and the chemo going into you with the needle. So your portacath becomes really your best friend. I love that thing, and I missed it when it was gone. Some days I still wish I had it. So now I have it saved on my Christmas tree. So that was me on chemotherapy. We went through that 6 months experience, and thankfully also it gave me a great sense of community, which I will also talk about later. Is I believe in the power of community when you're going through something, when you're going through any type of transition and any type of situation that is a challenge in life. I believe you need to be surrounded by people who understand what you're going through. And the brain injury piece for me was very lonely, and it still is something that I feel challenged by in my life. I feel like, especially with me having a mild traumatic brain injury, I'm a very high functioning traumatic brain injury survivor. There are not many people who can say they now are at this point in their life. I'm very blessed, but at the same time, it can be extremely lonely because not many people are with me. Thankfully, when I was going through chemo and cancer, I had other teenagers who were going through that. So I went to cancer camp for about 4 summers during that time in my life as a teenager, and they were some of the best experiences I had because I was able to connect with people who were going through challenging experiences. And they would just sit down with you and understand, and you could have a good cry with them and not feel alone and feel like you could actually say, I understand what you're going through, and yes, this stinks. And you can kind of have a day of self-pity with other people and be okay with it and have people that had your back and understood what you were going through. So that was a huge piece of my healing journey. And I also understood, I had a whole different experience of empathy and really getting to understand. I had it very much easier than other people. There were teenagers that had much worse than me. I did lose friends. Some of my cancer friends passed away, sadly. And I'm grateful that they were part of my life and that they taught me that lesson of life being precious you look at it in a whole different way. And you definitely have different priorities as a teenager when you're going through something like that, which was also a big part of my experience as well. Going through high school during this, I had a challenging time with friendships. I felt like I never really could connect with girls because girls had different priorities at that time. I never really fit in with anybody because I was going through something that nobody really understood. And therefore I had a harder time emotionally connecting. I think I took things differently and some people didn't fully understand that. I was very ready to be done with high school. Let's just put it that way. High school was not really fun for me. I kind of counted down the days for high school to end because I was like, I needed a new identity. I needed a new beginning. In 1998, I found there was an osteoma in my leg. I had a buildup of calcium in my leg. I had really extreme pain. And one day in 9th grade, all of a sudden I had really bad pain, and I was going through chemo at the time. And they found out that I had an osteoma, a buildup of calcium, which is just a fluke in my leg, but they couldn't operate on it until after I was done with chemotherapy. So I had to go through the 6 months of chemotherapy living with this extreme pain. It was the least serious of the 3 things that happened to me, but it actually was the most painful. It was horrible. And then I finally got to have surgery on it after my chemotherapy ended, and it was removed, and then that was done. So that was another part. They always say things come in 3s, right? I'm good for life now, as I joke. So as I talked about, high school was not fun. That's me in high school. I went through it as best I could. My long-term goal with my brain injury was always to go to college. My dad talks a lot about always having a goal. You have to have a goal of what are you going toward? What are you working towards, and where are you moving towards? And my goal was always to go to college. Even though with a brain injury, the research that you read, it will tell you college is not the easiest for any brain injury survivor or anybody even with a learning disability. It can be a challenge, and any type of disability can be a challenge. But for me, I knew that I wanted to go to college, and I wanted to work in a professional field that required a degree. So that was going to remain our long-term goal. And I started in high school doing more research about what colleges out there had services for students with disabilities. I only received services as my study hall at the time, and I only really needed it as an as-needed basis because, as I mentioned earlier, I only needed support for test taking, and really I didn't even need support. It was just there in case I needed it. I simply just kind of accepted that I didn't always do well on tests, but like I said earlier, I just simply did well on other projects to make my grade be a good grade, and I was a really good writer, so I could write really good papers and not have to be worried so much about my test taking. And I knew, and my dad would always reassure me, and my mom would reassure me that college was probably going to actually be easier for me than high school because college is actually much more application-based learning versus memory-based learning of all test taking. So we knew that college was a very reasonable goal for me, an achievable goal. So I went on to go to college. My first 2 years, that's me driving, which also, yes, that was an experience in and of itself. My permit test was harder than my driver's test because the permit test was one that was all memory. I had to retain all that information to take that written test. If some of you remember, when you're 15 years old, you have to take that lovely written test. And I took it 3 times, and it was not fun because I could not retain that information. And that was kind of my first experience where I really worked my butt off for something, and I really learned that no matter how hard it is, if you work hard, you can do it. Because I failed my first 2 times, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get my driver's license. I'm going to be a loser for the rest of my life, not be able to drive, which was a huge part of independence. As we all know, driving is a big piece of independence, and I knew that I needed that if I wanted to go on to college and go on to living independent. So I remember I decided after failing twice, I was going to work my butt off, and I was going to just force myself to memorize. And I locked myself in my bedroom, and I went over those things over and over and over again. I just did repetition, repetition, repetition. I repeated the question, and I wrote down the answer, and I repeated the question, and I wrote down the answer over and over and over again to get it into my brain. And then my dad took me the 3rd time to my test, and we were concerned that I'd maybe fail again because you only got 3 times, and then you had to wait a whole nother year to actually take the test again. So I went the 3rd time, and I knew that it was going to be pass or die. So I just worked my butt off that whole week before, and I went and I took the test, and I passed. And I remember how excited I was, and that was such a huge moment for me that, oh my gosh, I can do something, and I can work my butt off. And no matter how many people say it's not going to work for you, if you work hard at it, it's going to happen. So I eventually, then I got my driver's test, and I took my driver's test, and I also passed that and got my driver's license. Woohoo! Freedom! And then I graduated from high school in 2000. And as I mentioned, we decided that Augsburg College was a huge, huge college with learning disability support. They have a whole program actually for students with disabilities. They're actually nationally known for students with disabilities, they have a program called the CLASS program and the Access program. And there are students on campus that are with all different disabilities. And it's a really awesome, awesome college. And I went there, it's actually in downtown Minneapolis, and I visited downtown Minneapolis, that college, as a senior in high school, actually junior in high school when I started looking for colleges. And I knew that I was not ready to live in downtown Minneapolis with my brain injury. I was overwhelmed because one of my things with my mild brain injury is overwhelm is a huge piece of my challenges. Is I cannot, if I get overwhelmed, my brain kind of goes into chaos mode, and you kind of just want to shut down. So I knew that I was not ready to go from small town New Ulm, population 13,000, to downtown Minneapolis as an 18-year-old. So I expressed my concerns to my parents, and they had told me that there was actually a college in Mankato, because I had said I wish there was a college in Mankato, a smaller college. I didn't want to go to a state school. I knew I wanted to go to a private college that wasn't so huge, because for me, smaller was good. It wasn't so overwhelming. And I knew that I wanted something more than I wanted a 4-year degree. So my dad mentioned to me that Bethany Lutheran College was in Mankato. And I did some reading about their college, and I toured it, and I really liked their campus, and it felt great that it wasn't so far from home. It was only 30 miles from home. It was far enough, yet close enough. So I decided to do my first 2 years there, which I did. And then I went on to Augsburg College to get my degree in religion from Augsburg College. I also changed majors 3 times because I did not know really what I want. I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't really have a very clear picture of what it was. I started off at Augsburg College after I transferred there after my first 2 years at Bethany in Mankato. Then I transferred to Augsburg, and I started off thinking I was going to do social work because I knew that I wanted to do something with people, and I wanted to help people, and I wanted to give back in some way, and I wanted to be in a medical field, but I didn't really know what in the medical field. So I decided social work. And then I started to really get more into spirituality and really understanding more about what spirituality is to a person and how important that was to me. And that I wanted to be of support in that way for other people. So then I decided that there really wasn't enough spirituality in social work. So I changed majors to psychology because they did have a really cool class that was called spirituality and psychology, but that was only one class. And then I discovered that psychology was really a lot of diagnosing, and it was all research-based, and that was not really me. Once again, I was like, oh my gosh, I just want to comfort people and get paid for it. And I called my dad a few times. I had a few moments where I called my dad crying, my counselor dad crying, saying, oh my gosh, I just want to get paid and have a degree that allows me to help people, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life. A lot of my journey has really been kind of trusting the path and really kind of surrendering. Surrender oil is a really awesome oil to have. I've learned later in my years. I wish I had it back then. I did not. I probably could have used it. I eventually then decided I was going to maybe go into hospice care. So I changed to a religion degree, and I did graduate after 5 years of college from Augsburg College with my degree. I have a bachelor's degree in religion. And then I went on to Luther Seminary because I was going to do hospice care for a while. I actually felt called to be with people at time of death. Because of my near-death experience, death is not something that I am afraid of. I felt very comfortable with it, and I felt like it would be an honor to be with people at time of death. And then I went to seminary, and I discovered that it was kind of a little too, it didn't fit my spirituality as much. I'm a little too open-minded, and I decided, okay, maybe this isn't the right path for me. So then I took a little time out. I decided to take a break, and I came home, and I discovered that St. Kate's at that time started a holistic healthcare program. And I read about all the classes, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I want to do. I had started to kind of also at that time really get into energy healing and started learning more about energy healing. And I was familiar with it because my mom had taken me to various healers during my journey. And I decided, oh my gosh, I would love and be honored to do this for other people. And I think I meant to do this because I did feel from my own experience during my coma, I felt like I had a experience that allowed me to become more sensitive to energy and be able to feel and sense energy more. I did have an experience where a year after, or a short time after my coma, after I woke from my coma, I told my mom, and I actually really don't have much memory of this, but my mom shared with me later in life that I had mentioned to her one day driving in the car that I had been given a choice and that I chose to come back, and that I was going to help people in some capacity. And I do believe that. And I have now in my adult life, I've had meditations and I've had healing experiences where I have kind of connected with that source and feel like it was not my time. And I do believe that I was somewhere in those 5 days. When I was in my coma, obviously I was somewhere. I believe my soul was somewhere. I believe that during that time, I do feel like I was in a dimension that was with God, and that I had an experience with God, and God decided that it was not my time. And I came back, and I believe that that was part of my decision, was to come back and to continue on this journey and to continue doing something with my life. And eventually I found my way. I believe part of my struggle of finding how to fit my passion and my calling, which as a young adult, I don't think I fully understood that it was a calling until I was older to understand it. So part of my challenge being in my young 20s and picking out which degree was for me was part of that spiritual calling of not really knowing how do you fit into a box what something is that's larger than yourself type of thing. I don't think there's really much of a degree of, even for what I do now with my work. I kind of joke that there's really, yes, I'm certified in things, and yes, I have a master's degree, but really what I do is a higher calling, and it's God's work, and I'm simply the medium and the channel for that. And I was blessed to have an experience that helped me open up to that more. I believe we're all able to open up to that. I simply just had an experience that made me more sensitive to it. So I eventually went on to my master's degree program, and I went full-time. And my actual master's degree in graduate school was also easier for me than undergrad because it's much more application-based learning and it's more creative-based learning, and it was my passion. So I loved graduate school. Even with the brain injury, I thought graduate school was just amazing. I would do graduate school all over again if I could, because it was amazing and fun. And it was something that I was passionate about. So, that's me. That was me with Nate. And that's us on our wedding day. I did meet my now husband, Nate, when I was going through right before I started graduate school, during my break, actually, when I moved home. There are no accidents. I believe everything happens for a reason. And part of me having to take that break from when I left Luther Seminary and before I started my graduate program is when I met Nate. So I think part of that detour was on purpose. I believe part of it was on purpose so that I could meet him. And our paths crossed, thanks to God, all because of divine timing. I met him because I was supposed to have a spiritual meeting with somebody in Hutchinson, and she was late, and all because of her being late, I met him. So things happen for a reason. And we were married on September 10th, 2011. That's me and my family and with him. And we are now happily married still. All right. And that's us. Evan Craig, he was born on 12/15/12, and his actual guest date was actually today. He was supposed to be born on December 13th. And many doctors do not think that I would actually ever get pregnant because of my medical history. So he's my miracle baby. I used some oils, yay, to help me get pregnant, some spiritual oils to actually help that happen. And thankfully he came. And I remember seeing my guest date showed up on the computer screen. You can punch in, your whole ovulation thing. And it showed up as, your guest date is December 13th. And I honestly almost passed out, because that was kind of my whole, oh my goodness moment. And that was my God moment of my whole full circle journey. And I believe part of my reason of surviving was so that I could birth him into this world. And he's my little angel baby. He wanted his own birthday, though. He was not born on the 13th, and I don't blame him for that. So his birth time started on December 14th, and he was born on December 15th. And so it's kind of crazy to think that years earlier on the 15th, I was in a coma, and then fast forward years later, and I was giving birth on the day that I was in a coma. So that's pretty miraculous. I also, at the time, was working on my memoir, which I will mention later, and I never knew how my memoir was supposed to end. I always struggled with, what's the last chapter supposed to be? How do I end this story when I'm only 30 years old? What should the last chapter of my story be? And then I saw his guest date show up, and I knew, oh my gosh, he's going to be my last chapter of my book. So his birth story is my last chapter, and I believe it's kind of symbolic of the whole full circle life journey of death and life, as it always is a circle and a transition. So my life today, I now have my own practice here in New Ulm. As I mentioned, I finally graduated with my master's degree in holistic health. And at the time, I thought maybe I would get a job in a healthcare facility. However, there was really no place that kind of really hired me for what I wanted to do. And I didn't have a lot of the nursing degree background or the OT or the PT background, which you really need for you to do like holistic healthcare in a medical facility. You have to have the medical background as well. And my undergrad is in religion. So I decided, okay, I believe God wants me to do healing, and I'm just going to start my own practice, and I'm going to trust that it's going to work out and people are going to find me and it's going to grow however it's meant to grow. So I started my own business, and it's just slowly grown into what it has become. And I now have my practice here in New Ulm. And I also have a practice in Cokato where I see my clients once a month who are more towards the metro. I've had businesses. I've also had my practice in Shakopee and Burnsville and Mankato at various places in the past years. But now I'm here full-time at my New Ulm office and then also in Cokato once a month. And then I started the Oily Moms, which is now going on almost 2 years, thanks to the Young Living Essential Oil journey. Oils kind of came into my life kind of briefly when I was going through my whole health journey. Shortly after my cancer, I had heard about essential oils, but they were very new at that point in time, back in the late 90s and the early 2000s, so I didn't have much experience with them. And some of them, then later on when I had experiences with other energy healers, some of them would use oils on their clients, so I kind of knew what they were, but I didn't fully really know until I started having my business at various expos, and I would find myself always being next to an oil person. And I then started thinking, why don't I incorporate essential oils into my energy healing practice, and doing that with anointing the sick. So that's how I started getting really into Young Living Essential Oils. And then I heard about the Young Living Raindrop Technique training, and I took that training and became certified in that, which then kind of opened up a whole new world for me using my oils in my practice. And then my clients started coming to me asking about what oil was that you put on me? It made me feel great. I would love to get some. So then I started doing more research about Young Living Oils, and I met Missy, who is my upline leader support person, and she has been helping me and has been a huge part of my evolution with the oils. And then I saw a huge need for the education and support, that people needed to really understand them. So we helped form the Oily Moms, doing the classes here in New Ulm on a monthly basis, and doing the house parties and doing other types of events where we help other people learn more about Young Living Essential Oils. So that is how Oily Moms formed, which we now are on Facebook with our community of over 4,000 people and our small group community as well. And then I also have my memoir that I finished in 2008. It's an ebook and also a paper copy if you prefer a paper copy, but you can find that on my website, livingwellenergyhealing.com. Bear with me as it's going to be going through some transition. I'm working on updating that website, and we're also working on the Oily Mom website in the months ahead, so stay tuned for that. So through my experience, my dad developed what's called the decision-making model in rehabilitation planning. And I'm going to just show you kind of a visual of what my rehabilitation journey looked like, just to give you kind of a good idea of what rehabilitation means, and that it is a journey. And to really understand that my journey was not just from A to Z, all uphill, all easy peasy, and it was all great, and everything just fell into place for me. No, there definitely were challenges, which you can read about more in my book. But through my journey and through my experience, my dad, with his rehabilitation background, he developed an actual model, because he kind of learned that there needed to be kind of a better visual that showed what rehabilitation really looks like after an adversity, where some people think this, as you can see on the screen, ideal is where, oh my gosh, something happens and you feel like the ground just completely dropped out underneath you, and it's and it ended. Well, and then you just simply move forward and you go on from there. Well, the reality is that you can get stuck in a downward spiral, and then you're going to move up a little bit, and then something's going to happen and you're going to have a setback, and then you're going to move forward, and then there's going to be a setback. That's the reality of it. So you can see in this visual, this is more of my evolution through my journey and kind of what I went through with my own path. I obviously went through my own challenges. It was not always easy peasy. I had things that definitely were setbacks to me. And there's more in my book about things like that. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that. But here's where some of my challenges, I definitely had some challenges. I had a really awesome psychologist after my brain injury. And then we tried a different psychologist who was closer to where we lived, because we were actually traveling 2 hours to my psychologist. And then we learned that that was not a good thing. I really loved my psychologist, so we went back to her. So that's just kind of a visual of some things that can maybe happen. But then eventually I just kind of continued to move forward, and my journey was thankfully pretty good. There were some challenges in high school, as anything, and definitely I had classes and during my first 2 years of college that were not always the easiest, and I had to have experiences where I had to talk to the professor and share with them my experience, and I had to kind of speak up on behalf of my disability. That's me and my family now. So this is kind of the approach that I took to my rehabilitation, my holistic, and I call it, I should say, integrative approach. I like to use the term integrative more than holistic, because integrating means you're using both traditional medicine and complementary medicine. I believe there's a need for both. Obviously, chemotherapy saved my life. Drugs saved my life with my brain injury. I'm grateful for them. There's a need for them. They save lives every day. But I believe also in having a combination of the integrative approach so that you can take care of your whole self, especially the emotional and the spiritual part. I've used energy healing and qigong, massage, acupuncture, chiropractic care, supplements, spiritual care, and obviously the Young Living essential oils as well. Some of my favorite resources, I believe in the power of having a spiritual community. If you do not have a spiritual community, I highly recommend having one. Whatever your faith is a huge part of going through any adversity. I also am a firm believer in survivor groups and camps, as I mentioned earlier. That was a huge piece of me moving forward. Oprah, yay for Oprah. She really understands spirituality. Yay. She's kind of the first public person that puts spirituality in the forefront of understanding it and being okay with it and accepting it and educating ourselves more on it. I'm a huge fan of Brené Brown, as many of you know. If you have not watched her TED Talk on the power of vulnerability, I highly recommend it. Go on YouTube and type in Brené Brown TED Talk vulnerability, and you will watch it. And it's an excellent, excellent conversation about vulnerability and allowing yourself the permission to be vulnerable. Excellent, excellent resource. My favorite books that I've used: 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's a big piece of my journey. I am a huge Covey planner. This has been my lifeline. Just like a person without access to their feet needs a wheelchair, a person with a brain injury or any type of mental health, I'm a firm believer in having a planner. If I believe in the paper planners, I believe there's power in writing things down physically with your hand. Some people like electronics. If that works for you, that's great. But I really firmly believe in the power of writing things down. So that's what I use. I use the Covey Planner, and that's a whole class in and of itself. If you're interested in me teaching you about the Covey Planner, yes, I will teach you about that. The 8th Habit is also a book by Stephen Covey. He recently passed away, unfortunately, but he was a huge part of my journey. Also, The Power of Intention by Wayne Dyer is an excellent, excellent book. Highly recommend it. There's also a book called The Power by Rhonda Byrne. Huge book. This is a fast read, but an excellent book. I read it in like one day. Excellent book. And The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown is also one of my top favorite books. She also has 2 other books, Daring Greatly and Rising Strong. They go in that order. So start with The Gifts of Imperfection. That's a great place to start. Excellent, excellent book. I believe in learning from people who can teach you and having resources. My favorite oils that I've used especially for emotional support and brain support, Clarity is a huge must-have for me to help my brain function and stay alert and help with my memory, as well as Brain Power, an amazing oil. I love to wear those. Valor is chiropractor in a bottle. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail due to time and just because that would be a whole class in and of itself. But if you want more information on these specific oils, you can always contact me. Grounding is another one. It's a really great oil. It's similar to Valor, similar energetic properties. And Build Your Dream, to help me when people thought that, if people think that your dream is not going to happen, Build Your Dream helps your dreams happen. And of course, my all-time favorite oil is Believe. I love Believe oil because it helps you believe in yourself when sometimes the world tells you that you can't believe in yourself. It's an excellent oil. Some other ones I really recommend: Transformation, Trauma Life, Frankincense, and White Angelica, especially if anybody's going through a challenging time. Those are really huge oils to have during any types of transition. Here's more information on Oily Moms. If you're not on our Facebook page, please find them. And our website, oilymoms.org, is coming soon. And then you can currently go to my website, Living Well Energy Healing, and find me on Twitter and Periscope. The Oily Moms do Periscopes, which are fun to watch. If you're not on Periscope yet, check it out. It's a cool app to have on your phone. And here's my contact information. So that is kind of more of my journey. For those of you who don't know my story, I hope that it was kind of a better understanding of my evolution of how this whole thing happened, why I do what I do. Because I know a lot of you come to me for sessions or you come hear me talk or you come hear me do a presentation for Oily Moms, or you come to our classes and you might hear kind of a little snippet of what actually is my story, but you didn't really hear the full story. So I hope that this was a better understanding of what actually happened to me. I will open it up to questions, and if anybody wants to talk about anything further, I'm going to unmute you all. So be prepared. I'm going to unmute you if you have any background noise in the back. Does anybody have any questions? You can either shout it out, or you can also type it in. If you have that function on your phone, I think you can go on the top of your screen and you can type. You can go to more and you can hit chat and you can type in a message if you want to type something in, or if you just want to shout something out, you sure can. Otherwise, I'm just going to sit here for a couple minutes and chill and see if anybody has anything to say. Otherwise, I appreciate everybody taking time out of your day to listen to my story and put up with my hoarse voice. I'm a lot better than I was last Sunday, trust me. Thank God for thieves oil. How is everybody? Hey, Misty. I see Misty. Hi, Linda. I see Linda. Hi, Mom. Hi, Mom and Dad. Oh, Shrinklers. Hi, Shrinklers. Thanks for joining my chat, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for taking time out of your night to listen to me share my story. And thank you for being part of my journey, because you're all part of my journey, and each person has played a role in my success. I would not be here. Is anybody saying something? Question? No. But yes, I would not be here today without everybody playing a role in my rehabilitation journey. So thank you, everybody, for helping me get to where I am today, especially my parents. Shout out to my parents. Yay for good parents. Hopefully we pass that on to our little guy. Alrighty, I'm going to end this. Have a great night, everybody, and have a great week. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or a message on Facebook, and I'm happy to pass on any information that you need for yourself or anybody else. Enjoy your night. Adios.